Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown? I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Stephanie. You have found the Dark Oak. Today we explore part 3, the final piece of the Maura Murray missing persons case.
Wow, I am on pins and needles and so anxious and yet trepidatious just because I feel so bad for this family. I'm hoping you tell us something good today. Welcome to the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month, through our charity called the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of earnings from our Patreon and sponsors to a nonprofit organization related to the first episode of the month. To find out how you can be a part of the movement, head over to thedarkoak.com or stay with us until the end of the episode and we will give you all of the details.
Yeah, so here we are for part 3, where, I know in part 1 I had threatened 3 parts. I honestly thought I could get it done in 2 parts. It was not doable. So here we are for part 3, and it's also a doozy.
Well, it's a doozy of a case.
It's a doozy of a case, and a lot more just weird things. I keep using the word weird. I used it during part 1 and part 2, but there's just unexplained things that make everything seem harder to pinpoint. It's like you can't nail anything down. You can't stick anything to the wall, right?
Right. Every time I think, okay, this might be the direction we're going, you throw something at me that kind of says, oh, no, that's not it. Or maybe that's not it. Or
Maybe, and again, I've used the phrase over and over, but maybe it's something, maybe it's nothing.
right.
And I've said it in part 1 and part 2, and I'll say this part is the same. And most of the information that we have gotten, almost all the information that I've gotten for part 1, 2, and 3 came from Julie Murray's podcast, Media Pressure, where she talks about her sister's disappearance. And she says too, it's just we're throwing out information, hoping that something means something to someone.
Wow.
That kind of jogs their memory, that makes them remember something, that brings something else to light, that some pieces kind of fit together at some point to create a bigger picture. But it's difficult. It's hard to know in a case like this. Does it mean anything? Does it not mean anything? In part 1, we talked about kind of where Maura was in her life. She had done very well, but she was going through some struggles just as a young person. As I think almost all of us have experienced, we have low points in our life where we're trying to figure out who we are and what we want to be and how we get there. And so that kind of points you in one direction on the case. And then part 2, we talked about the day of Maura's disappearance and how kind of was it setting it up where she was leaving voluntarily, or was she planning to never be found? Was she going to a hotel to meet somebody? Who knows? And that kind of led to her accident, and then how the police handled the accident, which I don't know that was handled very well. At a minimum, I think there was some pretty bad note taking.
At a minimum, I would agree with you.
So, and that leads us now to part 3, where we're going to talk about what happened when Maura's family got boots on the ground.
Okay.
Because we're going to find out they were not taking any of this lying down. They are a close-knit family, and they're here to just tackle it. So we're going to talk about what happens when they got to New Hampshire, how the police handled the investigation after the fact, and we'll get into some theories about some things that could have happened to her. And then we'll kind of go into what the Murray family is doing now.
All right. Well, tell me more.
Let's get into it. On Tuesday, February 10th, a search warrant was executed and 18 items were taken from Maura's car. So they gained access to the car and they took 18 items, but it was still several more hours before the Murray family was even notified of Maura's disappearance.
That's weird to me, too. You find an abandoned car and the owner is hours away and you don't even like call the owner to be like, hey, we found your car. Who's driving it? Are you know what I mean? That seems strange.
No one tried to contact them that night.
So 24 hours almost or approximately goes by before the Murray family even finds out anything happened.
Apparently, there was a call left earlier in the day. I don't remember exactly what the timestamp on what that was. I think it was like late morning that they had called to try to get in touch with Fred, but he was not home. So we
Okay.
didn't get the message right away.
Okay.
And then at one point, they wound up contacting one of the sisters. It's like they contacted an uncle who then got in touch with the sisters, who then got in touch with Fred.
Okay.
So
they're trying. And again, this is before we had cell phones on us.
trying, right. But by 3:40 p.m. the next day, her family was finally in the know.
Mm.
Fred, Maura's father, called the police department around 6 p.m. and left a message. And no one called him back. Sorry, maybe they're just bad at their jobs. I don't know. But it's like,
I mean, if it is a small town, what are we talking? 3 officers? Are we talking 5 officers? And like they're all on the, you know what I mean? And like, I mean, does it make it okay? No, but like, you know what I mean? You're going to get a different response in a major metropolis than you are in, a small town department.
Yeah, that's fair. So after repeated calls to the station, as you can only imagine.
Now that's
you're losing your
terrible.
mind, right? Cecil finally called him back at 8 p.m. So he had not been in touch with anyone outside of someone just saying, hey, we found your abandoned car. To which Fred was like, oh my gosh, my daughter's driving that car, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't even able to talk to anyone until 8 p.m. that night.
But he didn't call till 6.
At 3:40, the family was notified, but I don't think Fred knew.
Okay.
Because remember, it was the phone tree to get to Fred. So
Okay.
I don't think that was intentional that Fred waited that long to call.
Okay.
Honestly.
So Fred didn't find out till almost 6.
I
called immediately
yes.
and then had to sweat for 2 hours trying to get a call back.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So the family technically knew, but Fred didn't know.
Oh, poor guy.
Yeah. Now, according to Fred, this conversation with Cecil Smith was a little off-putting. He described Cecil as very, quote, stiff-lipped, not wanting to share much information at all, and quickly figuring that there was little he could do without being on location. Fred began to drive to New Hampshire.
Sure. What else could you do?
Absolutely.
You're helpless. You're at least I'm going to be near.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, again, the timeline. She left the University of Massachusetts on Monday afternoon. She had her accident Monday night. Tuesday, they contacted the family. They did a search warrant of her car. On Wednesday morning, Fred was arriving in New Hampshire.
Poor guy drove through the night. How awful. Oh, I can't imagine the hell that must have been.
And he drove directly to the accident scene expecting to join the search.
Oh.
When he got there, he realized he was the search.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Nobody. Nothing.
Even if they believe she just walked into the snow to kill herself, like we're not going to go looking for her?
It's strange to me. It's really strange. Like, I don't... So what did you guys do all Tuesday, too? He got there, no footprints anywhere. He found no footprints. It had snowed overnight. There was nobody there. Like, I don't know. I just... You could hear the pain in his voice when he was talking about this. He's like, I'm expecting people to try to find my baby. And I get there, no one's there. And he said, and I got out of my car and I just started wandering on the woods thinking, and he's like, and I wanted to find her and not find her, at the same time. He's like, I just kept thinking, this is so scary. What if I do find something that I don't want to find? But of course he found nothing. So after that, he headed back to the police department. But when he got there, no one would speak to him. He couldn't get anyone to give him any amount of time, even though he had driven overnight to try to do anything he could to help. He got there and no one would even engage with him. He even went as far as to say they were evasive, which to me is a pretty strong word.
And here's the thing. I do know that sometimes they just can't share everything, but I do believe there is a way to be sympathetic and say, I'm sorry, I can't tell you everything we know. It's for the better of the case. It's for this reason, but I'm really, and still show sympathy and empathy for the family. And I feel like if you had done that, you probably wouldn't have been described as evasive.
Yes. That's how I feel. And that's why I included this word. I mean, to just be kind of unfriendly or
Mhm.
not super cooperative is one thing. To have the word evasive in there is, I mean, that's pretty strong. And to me, it's very unwelcoming. So that must have been a terrible feeling for Fred.
I will say the thing that gets me over and over in the more of these cases that we do is trying to imagine myself in the shoes of these loved ones who've lost their family members and feeling like they feel like nobody else cares, because I just can't imagine what that must feel like to know your baby or your child or whoever this loved one is gone, and other people don't realize like what a big deal that is.
And these people that are paid to care, even if you don't actually care, it's your job to care.
Right, right. Now,
Listen to me, help me.
and I can understand not everybody is good at showing empathy. And honestly, sometimes I think law enforcement officers have to be able to turn some of that off. But
Mm.
have somebody there who can talk to a family, a
An
victim's right.
advocate or
Have
something.
somebody there
Yeah.
who can be kind.
Yeah. So, not knowing really what else to do at this point, Fred kind of posted up at the Haverhill police station, just waiting for updates.
What
Like,
else could
well,
you do?
what else can you do? And that afternoon, he wandered outside of the police station just to kind of get some fresh air, like just to kind of walk around a little, just to kind of reset. And coincidentally, he ran into dog handlers that were arriving back from the scene of Maura's accident.
Okay, so they did send, so they are doing something.
They're
Not much, but
doing,
they're doing something.
well, they're doing something.
Okay.
There's an asterisk.
Okay. Of course.
Of course there is. So he goes up to them and introduces himself and said, I'm Maura's father. I got here as quick as I could. Can you tell me like what's going on? Has anything been done? Did you find anything? Just anything, really. Give me any kind of information. And the handlers tell him that the dogs had walked about 100 yards, but they didn't find anything. And they didn't catch any kind of scent or anything. They never even followed a scent. And they said that it was simply too cold and too wet to get any kind of results. Now, as it turns out, the scent item they used to track Maura were the pair of black leather gloves that found in Maura's car. You remember the black leather gloves that she had recently been gifted, and no one is sure if she even wore.
Even use them. Now, the police wouldn't have known that at the time. You would have assumed that she probably wore these gloves, but
At the same time, Fred is in the police
mhm,
station.
mhm.
Don't you think it would have been beneficial of them to ask a loved one, hey, we have this list of items here that were recovered from her car. Do you know which one she had worn most frequently
Right.
or would have more of a scent? And Fred, I mean, all out says, like, I would have told them to use a pair of her running shoes or something like that. Something
Mm,
I know she had worn and worn a lot, something that smelled like her. Not these gloves that we're not even sure if she ever even put on.
right, right.
But no one ever asked him. And after that search was over, it was over. There was no going back. And also, there's the fact that it took them 48 hours to go and do a search,
Right.
which I don't know, with these dogs, maybe that's not a big deal. But at the same time, with new snowfall and everything, I do feel like that's a big deal.
It's a small station. It's a small department. So they may not have all the resources. So it may take them a little bit, they may not have dogs on hand. Maybe they do. I don't know. So there might be a little bit of a delay in getting that out there, but all the more reason to be like, hey, we got fresh snow coming in. We've got, all of this going on. It's cold. It's wet. We're going to lose it. That's all the more reason to ramp things up and get things moving faster. You know what I mean? Like, that you're losing time. You know that there are disadvantages to searching in the snow. So
There's also the strange timing. So you mentioned, oh, well, at least they're doing something. It does make me wonder if Fred hadn't showed up that
right.
day, would they have sent the dogs out?
Right.
And maybe they were. Maybe you're right. It took that long to get the handlers involved. It's just the way it works there. Everything runs a little slower. But maybe Fred showed up and they're like, oh, we should probably go search.
True.
You know, I don't know.
True.
About this time is when police also started to promote this idea of Maura having tried to take her life. And they started asking Fred questions that put him in a position where he would agree with their hypothesis. You know what I'm saying? They were said, so Maura was having a hard time. So Maura liked to drink.
So leading
So
questions.
we see that Maura is, has been involved in a school issue. Kind of leading questions, basically making Fred kind of think like, wait, why are you asking me these kind of questions? And he reiterated over and over, like, that's not Maura. That's not what Maura would be doing. And again, I want to reiterate, there were no footprints anywhere. So
too much of it, I mean, again, we don't really know what goes through anybody's mind when they decide to end their life. And could it happen suddenly? Could everything be fine and then suddenly they're triggered? I guess probably. I'm sure that happens. But there's so much that doesn't point that direction.
Yeah, the fact that there were no footprints. I mean, I think you don't have to be a genius to be like, okay, well, somebody probably picked her up, right? I don't know who picked her up, but that seems like a more likely scenario.
Right. Confirmed by the dogs not being able to find anything. Confirmed by the fact that when they arrived, nobody saw anything. No. Was all that liquor that she bought, was any of it opened? Do we know?
Some of it was gone.
Okay. So she was potentially drinking.
Yeah. Some of it was gone.
Because,
I don't know how
I'm
much.
thinking, why buy all that liquor and then go kill yourself? But if she was drinking, then who knows?
Right. Now, as soon as police found this letter from Bill, remember that email from Bill talking about the cheating? That was all. They were like, oh, that's it.
Motive.
That's motive. That's it.
And how many months prior was that? Many, right? Several months prior.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, quite a while. 8 months, 9 months. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know. Really?
I know. I'm with you. I'm like, I don't know that's, is that a possibility? Yes. Is it the most likely possibility? No. So why aren't you exploring these other angles?
Very good point. We don't have anything that definitively says this was a suicide. So we can't just get pigeonholed.
Yes. And the fact that they kept trying to force that rhetoric to me, again, I mean, and I don't want to get too speculative, but I'm like, are you covering something up or are you just bad at your job? What's happening right now?
And later on, are you covering stuff up because you were bad at your job? Is that what you're covering up? The fact that you just did a really crappy job?
All the things. Cynthia.
Yeah.
All the things. Now, the whole Murray family is basically in New Hampshire now. They're like,
oh, they've literally relocated?
All of them. They literally had a command center at a hotel. And at one point they had to move hotels because they're like, our cell service is not good enough here. We've got to get a better hotel. So they're all there. And I mean, Bill was there and Julie was deployed or about to be deployed. So she had to change her orders. So she came. I mean, it was all hands on deck. Everybody was there. Even at one point, Bill's sponsors, so he had basically this couple that kind of helped guide him through military training and stuff. Even they showed up.
Oh.
I mean, it was everybody came to do everything that they could. Everybody just loved Maura. And when Fred was like, nobody's doing anything here, everybody came out of the woodwork. So they started re-interviewing neighbors, anybody up and down the road. They found almost nobody had been spoken to by police. Nobody had asked them for statements. Nobody had talked to them. I don't understand any of that, but that's what they found.
The only thing I can think of is this police department was just really ill prepared for anything of this magnitude. That doesn't make it okay, but they just had no clue what to do.
Yeah, it's very possible. Now, in their line of questioning, the family wound up going over to Faith Westman's home. Remember, she was the one that had originally heard the thud, looked out the window, saw the accident. And what she said raised another question. She said that she and her husband, they were doing some projects in the house. They were kind of like in and out of their kitchen, but they could see, again, they could see the vehicle. So it's not like they were sitting there staring at it, but as they would pass through the kitchen, just like you do, you kind of look out the window like, oh, yep, car's still there. And she confirmed that a police car came to the scene within 6 to 7 minutes of her calling the police. Now, we're all talking about minutes here, and so maybe everyone's timeline is not correct. However, 6 to 7 minutes is a far cry from the 20 minutes that it supposedly took Cecil Smith to arrive at the scene. And then we also have Karen McNamara's account where she saw someone at the scene before Cecil Smith arrived as well.
When Faith saw the police SUV arrive, did it ever leave? Or no, she saw one arrive and it stayed the whole time.
At that point, she stopped watching.
She stopped watching. Because I don't even know where my mind's going, but like there's this part of me that's like, could somebody have arrived and then left and then somebody new arrived? But yet no, because Cecil's saying I was driving 001, but I didn't get here till 20 minutes later. But we have two witnesses now saying he was there, approximately 20 minutes earlier or 10 minutes earlier, or whatever the difference in the timeline is. It's really hard to believe that a police officer would get there. I mean, I don't know how you could. I don't know how you could get it wrong.
Isn't it weird?
I mean, I would have to say that the two civilians, their timelines.
And then again, where did Maura go? By the time Cecil got there, she had just vanished. So
allegedly 6 or 7 minutes. Now, if it had been 20 minutes, anybody could have come along.
Sure.
And gotten her.
But Faith Westman said 6 to 7 minutes. And I'm sorry, even if your timelines are a little wonky, you don't confuse 6 to 7 minutes with 20 minutes.
Right. Right. But in my mind, 001 got there and then 001 left. And then a different police officer got there. And that's what's been reported on. But we know that's not true because it was 001 the whole time. But 001's reporting is very bizarre and odd.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. And this shouldn't be so hard to figure out, right?
No. Well, it's interesting.
If everything was on the up and up,
right,
this shouldn't be hard to figure out.
It shouldn't be hard at all because the record should be accurate. It's just interesting that you have two witnesses whose story lines up with each other, but directly go against the officers.
I agree.
You don't mistake driving by an accident scene and seeing a vehicle and saying, oh, 001. Like, you don't make that up in your head.
Right. Right.
The timeline she could have been off on, but then
Sure.
you got Faith over here confirming the timeline.
Right.
I don't know.
On February 13th, 4 days after Maura's disappearance, her father, Fred, was allowed to inspect the car. So he was allowed to inspect her car. Finally. He found that it was, as we've already said, was drivable. And just as the EMS noted, there was a rag stuck in the tailpipe.
Oh, that's
Which,
right.
do you
I
remember
forgot about that?
Okay.
I did, and I thought at the time, did she do that to like stop the smoke from coming out?
What?
Or is that dangerous?
No, are you like a genius? That's exactly what she did.
Okay.
A lot of people have really, all kinds, like, is it a gang thing? Is it
right? Is somebody trying to get her to have
kill
to
her? Exactly. Like, no. Fred knew exactly what it was when he saw it. And according to him, he told Maura, if for whatever reason, God forbid, she had to drive the Saturn to try to shove a rag in the exhaust pipe to try to cut down on the spewing smoke and oil in order to just get her a short distance wherever she had to go. Of course, in his wildest imagination, he could never imagine her driving on like a huge road trip in this vehicle. So to him, that is not a big deal. He was like, well, Maura was driving the car and she just tried to do what I told her to do.
Okay.
So to the Murray family, this is a nothing.
Because they knew why.
Exactly. Now, it is peculiar, though. So I see how a lot of people are kind of stuck on it. However, they think this is totally explainable.
Well, I mean, Fred admits, I told her to do it.
Exactly.
So that explains it.
Right. So as far as we know, there was nothing sinister about this very odd detail.
Okay.
Her family also examined the contents of the car. And Julie specifically was pretty instrumental in this because, you're going to know, how does your sister pack, right?
Right.
You're going on a road trip. And I use pack in like quotation marks here because, as her sister Julie describes on an episode of a podcast in Media Pressure, it was hard to tell if Maura had actually packed things or if the clothing they found in her car was just random stuff she already had in there.
So there was no packed suitcase or overnight bag or
No.
anything. Not even.
It was like random stuff. It was like a random pair of pants, a sports bra, a pair of socks, a blouse. Like, it was
Fresh
not.
underwear, because you would pack fresh underwear.
Don't remember if
Toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant. You would
um
pack all of that.
yeah, but again, and they were just kind of thrown in the car.
But
Like,
I
there
can
was
also. Okay.
no. But again, if you're Maura and you're going to track meets and stuff like that, aren't you going to have deodorant in there? Aren't you going to have
Yes.
like,
Yes.
you know what I'm saying?
I actually have a kind of a go pack in my car with a fresh pair of underwear, in case I ever.
In case.
Yeah. Deodorant, toothbrush, toothpaste, all those things. But you wouldn't mistake it for me having packed.
Well, and there's a debate about, now maybe she just left hastily and she grabbed some things and threw
Was
it
it
in the
even
back
in a
seat.
bag?
No, yes and no. I mean, I think there were multiple bags with just kind of stuff shoved into them.
Okay.
But again, that could have been she stayed the night at a friend's house and just had a leftover
Right.
bag that was still in the back seat.
Right. Because I would say, like, if you just have, like, handful, like, clothes, not even, like, in a grocery bag. Even my 19-year-old son, if he's going somewhere, he's going to, I mean,
I love the visual of the grocery
No,
bag.
no, because I use that as an example because though I buy my son, like, hey, here's this nice overnight bag or gym bag or whatever, all of his stuff goes in a grocery bag. You know what I mean? So, like, even that, I would be like, okay.
I don't know exactly what was in what location.
But it sounds like nobody can really say for sure.
Nobody can say for sure. Even Julie was like, maybe, but
we probably can say for sure that it didn't appear Maura was going away for a romantic weekend.
I think that's for sure. And it also, what she had in her car was not enough to sustain her for multiple days.
Okay. Which could point back to a potential suicide, quite
Possibly.
frankly. Or also could point to something really bad happening and she was just going for dry. I mean, that's strange. Strange you're going on what appears to be like a weekend, or it's not over the weekend, but like a few day road trip and you don't pack anything. That's weird.
It's all weird. It's just, yeah. Who knows?
Okay.
Things that were notably missing included her black backpack that she went everywhere with, her cell phone, her keys and keychain, her identification, her purse, and her bank cards.
So I would assume that if she did get out of that car willingly, she would have taken those things.
Those are the things you would have taken. Yeah. And as noted earlier, there was some alcohol that was missing as well.
Oh, okay. So like when you said missing, I was thinking like part of the bottle had been.
It was not
emptied.
clarified, so I'm not sure. I don't know if
Okay.
it meant a whole bottle was missing
Okay.
or if just some of the alcohol had been consumed. I don't know the answer to
Okay.
that, but I do know some of the alcohol was, quote, missing.
Okay. But see, her having all that stuff with her kind of leads me to think that she left willingly. Now, that doesn't mean that she left willingly to go commit suicide. She could have left willingly to go call for help, although there's no footprints. She could have left willingly in somebody's car to go call for help. Because I will tell you this. When you said the car was drivable, I'm like, oh, well, why didn't she drive away? But then when I'm imagining, I've never, knock on wood, been in a vehicle where like an airbag went off. I don't know that I would even try.
It would have been unnerving. I mean, your nerves would be shot, right?
Like, and then you're in the snow and it's getting dark and you don't really know where you are. Like, even if my car could drive, I personally do not know that I would attempt to drive a vehicle with the airbags having, like, in that state. I just don't know that I would try, especially a car that was already having issues.
Right.
I don't know that I would have driven that off. But I also don't, I wouldn't have just sat on the side of the road doing nothing. I mean, you have to do something.
I think both points are very valid. I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty independent and I have a lot of self-confidence, but I don't know that I would have tried to drive that car. At the same time, I don't know. I probably would have like hoofed it over to the Westmans or something, you
Honestly,
know?
I think that's probably what I've done. I would have said a prayer and taken my chances and hope that there's a nice woman who
Yeah.
answers the door when I knock on it.
Yeah. Unless a police officer showed up and you think they're trustworthy and something weird happens.
Which,
I don't know. I mean,
no, I mean, all along I've been saying 001. There was a lot of fishiness. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, 10 days after her disappearance, the New Hampshire Fish and Game conducted a second ground and air search, and they used a helicopter which had a thermal imaging camera. They also included tracking dogs and cadaver dogs, but nothing was found.
So she didn't go out into the woods and die.
It
I mean, I
would
guess
not
it's
appear
possible.
so.
It's possible, I guess. Maybe nothing's 100%, but unlikely, which we already knew because there's no footprints. I know I knew we keep saying that, but like that's kind of
It's an important detail.
Evidence. It's like evidence that she didn't walk away.
Right, like when Cecil Smith arrived and he was like, "Whoa, that's weird. Where's the driver?" And then he sees footprints into the snow. You know she went into the snow, but
Right.
he didn't report that.
Right.
After this, the investigation kind of began to stall out already, like halted before it even began. And the Murray family was having none of it.
Yeah.
So they began to seek and find media attention and really put the pressure back on the police. So they went to several heavy-hitting Boston newspapers and publications and television stations and were like, nah, like, we have got to figure out what happened to our daughter. They also found the locals to be extremely helpful. I mean, again, my heart just totally breaks for Fred, but he said he had this habit where, because they had their like command post at their hotel. He said he would go in the afternoon and literally sit at the accident site, and locals knew that they could go and find him there and pass on any information that they had heard or anything that they knew. I mean, it makes you teary thinking about it. I mean, as a parent, it's like, you would do it. You would do it. And he was like, and I would just tell him, this is where you can find me. This is where you can find me. You don't want to call me. I don't have to tell anybody I know anything. You just share what you know.
He was literally doing anything he could.
Anything.
Everything he could.
Anything and everything. Right. Okay, now, if what I have already told you is not weird, we're going to tell you some more weird things.
Eventually, Stephanie, I think you're going to have to run out of weird things to tell me.
Well, one would hope, because I'd like to get to the bottom of these weird things. I do not delight in telling you these weird things.
Oh my gosh.
Because most of these weird things should honestly not be weird things.
I'm really like bothered by the idea that an entire police department, their record keeping could be so bad.
Yeah, it's possible.
But if their record keeping was actually on track, which we know it wasn't because they don't even have names of these witnesses and stuff, unless they just haven't released some of that. Because I know there have been some things where you've said, to this day, we still don't know who this witness was or this was. I guess potentially they could still have that and not have released that because they've been so stingy with what they release.
Right.
But just on the surface, it appears they just didn't have great record keeping.
It's possible.
Okay.
All right. Now we're going to go back to police SUV 001 and Karen McNamara. And I'm going to tell you everything I know about that SUV that evening. It's not going to satisfy all of your questions, but I'm going to tell you everything that I know. As we've talked about, Karen McNamara passed by this SUV, going quickly, in the same direction as her, past her car. Apparently it was passed twice because this vehicle, which was supposedly being driven by Cecil Smith, he took a shortcut, which wound up being a long cut, which then meant he was behind Karen McNamara, passed her again, eventually got to the scene of Maura's accident, where Karen McNamara passed police SUV 001 for the final time. She felt it was fishy right away. She just was like, that's weird.
That is weird.
That's odd. And again, 001, I mean, it's in big decal. Like, you can't miss it. And again, she knew it was the same one because she noted that it was 001 as it had gone by. According to Karen, she did not immediately report this strange incident because she had heard rumors of police corruption and wanted to stay out of the melee. It wasn't until several days later when the media started asking anyone who knew anything to come forward that she said, I've got to do it. Like, I've got to tell somebody. She didn't reach out to the Murray family, though. She called into the police dispatcher and told them what she had seen.
From their own officers.
Right, but again...
But, I mean, I'm not saying she did anything wrong. I'm just saying, to clarify, correct. She's calling into the police to say what she saw one of their own officers doing.
Correct. A short time later, dispatch called her back and asked if she was sure that she saw SUV 001. And she confirmed that she was sure. And Karen has never wavered from this statement.
She is positive.
She is positive that it was 001 in her mind. Then, without Karen's knowledge or her request, her name and contact information was removed from the report, and she was renamed Witness A in the police statement. It wasn't until years later, when she heard that the Murrays wanted to speak to her, that she realized her name had not been used in the report. As in, there was no way for someone to contact her back. It wasn't until basically word of mouth got out and somebody was like, hey, they're looking for somebody who called in to report having passed SUV 001. And she's like, wait, that's me.
Okay. Fishy.
Okay.
Fishy.
Again, maybe that's just how they do random eyewitness reports.
Maybe they try to protect the identity. Okay.
It's
maybe.
possible.
All right.
Could mean something, could mean nothing.
And she has not admitted that she wanted to, like, be anonymous or anything.
No.
Okay.
No. Now, what comes next is my attempt and Julie's attempt, and I guess in some way the Haverhill Police Department attempt at trying to clarify who was in SUV 001. Remember, there was a bit of a mix-up with those two tow truck drivers.
Yes.
Lavoie, who towed Maura's car back to his personal lot, and then there was McKean, who they should have called for Maura's car, but didn't. Okay, so Police Chief Jeff Williams was the driver of the SUV 001, and he was intoxicated, remember, earlier that morning. And supposedly, when the police chief SUV numbered 001 was pulled from the ditch, according to the tow truck driver, Cecil Smith switched cars with the chief, giving Williams, the police chief, his own car, like giving
his personal car
to drive home because he just lived around the corner. He lived like a minute from where the car had gone off the road. So supposedly the police chief was just going to drive back home and sleep it off. Cecil Smith was going to drive police SUV 001.
I can see that happening.
Okay. The problem with this is that earlier in the afternoon, after the accident, but earlier than...
After the chief's accident?
So after the chief's accident, but before Maura's accident, Cecil Smith was on record writing a ticket in another county, and he was not driving SUV 001.
And his story is that he drove 001 for the rest of his shift.
Yes.
Okay. I would want to know how we gathered what vehicle he was driving for that previous accident in another county. Like, how is it just something you fill in? And did by accident he fill in his normal vehicle number, out of habit? Did someone say, like, I would want to know how that was reported.
That was getting the ticket, they said he wasn't driving that car. So according to them, they said he wasn't driving the car.
Okay.
Another interesting fact is that two passersby who drove past the scene of Maura's accident while police were present said they saw Maura's car door open Even though Cecil Smith, when he arrived, he said the car was closed, locked, and abandoned.
So 2 independent witnesses are saying the car door was open
While
once
there was a
again.
police car there.
Okay.
I have a few more bizarre tidbits I'm just going to throw out in the mix. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Murray family has been very complimentary of the Woodsville locals. Those have come out of the woodwork to like tell them, anything that they may have heard. And many came forward with theories and rumors and reported them directly to the Murrays. Now, the Murrays admitted this was not always pleasant news,
Sure.
right? I mean, here they're hoping to find Maura alive, but a lot of them were tales of her getting murdered or lost or terrible things happening to her. Still, some leads are better than no leads.
Yeah, they want to find out what happened to their daughter, even if it's something terrible.
Right. Now, a few months into their search, a local private investigator named John Smith became interested in Maura's case. And it wasn't long until he became acquainted with the Murrays because they're around, right? Several days after meeting with Fred Murray, the local police came knocking on John Smith's door. They told him that if he helped the Murrays, he would be arrested.
What?
Let's just say their request wasn't wrapped up in like pleases and thank yous either. I mean, they were really threatening him that if he didn't stay away from investigating Maura Murray's case, there would be repercussions for him.
Can you do that? If he's not breaking any laws?
I don't know. But, I mean, according to John Smith,
he was threatened.
He was threatened by the police department.
Which, first of all, why? I mean, I can kind of understand if he was interfering with the case and like hurting the case, hurting the investigation, stuff like that. I can see how someone putting themselves in this kind of situation could hurt things.
And maybe that's what they thought. Maybe all this weird stuff at the police department is them just being inept. So maybe they went to him and said, listen, we're doing the best we can on the investigation. You muddling it up, throwing weird, monkey wrenches in there is not going to help. Interviewing people, riling people up, putting theories in people's heads. It's not helping. If you do it, we're going to consider it interfering with an investigation.
Right. But still, a lot of cases, they end up hiring, private investigators. And I don't know that I've ever heard of them threatening to arrest them for helping a family who's, a victim's family.
Well, for a while, John Smith really kind of took this to heart. He's like, okay, fine. I don't want to be arrested.
It would be very intimidating.
Right. So he really kind of backed off from talking to the Murrays for quite some time, but he really wanted to help. And Fred clearly didn't understand like why you just like fell off the map. You said you wanted to help me. And according to John, one day he was just like, you know what? Screw it. If I get arrested, I just get arrested. Like, I want to go help them. And so he did. He went headfirst into helping them. And to this date, none of their threats have come to fruition, which makes me wonder, like, were they just weird, empty threats? Like, was he getting too close to something that he shouldn't? I don't know. It's just a weird tidbit. Maybe it means nothing.
It's a weird tidbit in a case that's full of weird tidbits.
Right. In June of 2004, over a year and a half after Maura's disappearance, the police approached the Murray family asking to repossess all of Maura's items that had been found in the car the night of her disappearance. Now, of course, her family thought this meant the investigation might be kicking off into high gear again. Like, oh, shoot, there's been some break in the case, right? So they gladly handed over anything that they had. Police even kept the hard drive from Maura's college computer, which honestly is a bit strange for me, considering this is just, according to them, a missing persons case.
It is strange that they want all of this stuff if it's just, a missing person who they believe walked off and died in the snow somewhere.
Exactly, which is what they've been saying. So, unfortunately, though, there were no new developments. And now the Murray family are without Maura's final possessions and without answers. And of course, both Maura's sister Julie and her father Fred say on Media Pressure, Julie's podcast, that they would have gladly given those things up, even now. They're like, if it was going to help her case, like, we're not trying to not be cooperative. But now you have all of her things and you're not doing anything with them. Frustrating, right?
Yeah.
Now, without any movement from law enforcement, the Murrays moved forward with their own investigation and requested to see Maura's police file. They were denied. They requested again, and they were again denied. It was clear that law enforcement was not going to play ball. So in January of 2006, Fred Murray sued New Hampshire for the release of Maura's file. He lost the case.
Oh.
He then appealed the decision and was again denied. The reason given for keeping the files closed was that there was a, quote, 75% chance they could need them for court hearings. Whatever that means. To date, law enforcement has never admitted this is even a criminal case. Now, Fred Murray sued New Hampshire under what's called basically a transparency law. That's where he tried to get Maura's files. We have one here in Florida, too. It's called the Sunshine Law. Incredibly, the Sunshine Law is actually the reason that the Florida man exists, because our records are so transparent that people can get to these ridiculous stories of clueless criminals. But New Hampshire had their version. And so, of course, the Murray's attorney said, how can you deny us seeing these reports? It's in violation of this law, this transparency law held by the state of New Hampshire. Fred's attorney argued, and rightly so, that denying the family the right to see the files because someone one day might maybe need them for a criminal trial versus the more likely chance that reviewing the files may unlock a memory or unearth clues for the family to actually help solve the case. The court was ruling in a way that didn't honor the transparency laws in the state of New Hampshire. The court responded by denying all requests and instead instating a new law that is called the Murray exemption that blocks access to files that may contain helpful investigatory material.
That's disturbing. I mean, I don't know what other word I have for it, just for the off chance that we may one day need these. I mean, okay.
20 years later, I'm kind of like, are those files still 75% likely to be used in a criminal trial?
Right. We'd have to catch the bad guy first, which...
Or even admit this is criminal?
Right. Why are you worried about a criminal trial when you think that's not what happened?
Right.
Oh, man. The red tape.
It's
pretty
icky.
Yeah, I feel very icky. And again, I have so much empathy for this family who's just like, let's not forget we lost our daughter.
Right. Those files may mean more to the family. Oh, wait, we haven't looked into that person, or we haven't talked to that person. Or do you remember when this weird thing happened with Maura and that person? Who knows?
Right. Or we know that letter came 8 months earlier and was in a box. Or we know why that rag was in that exhaust pipe. Or,
right.
Things that exactly the police have locked in on as
important, but the family may have a better perspective on it.
Right. Wow. You would think that the police would want the family's help.
It's been a very contentious relationship between the Murray family and the Haverhill Police Department. And maybe it just is, but it does make you think, is there something more that's going on?
Right. Could there be something as nefarious as a police are somehow involved in her disappearance? Honestly, some of this evidence or circumstantial evidence or eyewitness reports kind of points that maybe there could be. At the same time, could they just be trying to cover up the fact that they screwed up? Because that would be hard. It would be hard to look at a family and say, I'm sorry, we screwed it up.
Right.
That would be very hard to say.
Right. Well, we're kind of approaching the end, I guess. According to interviews and statements from the Murray family on the podcast Media Pressure, most member of Maura's family believe that Maura went with some kind of foul play, which I think that you're kind of leaning that direction now.
I feel like she had to have gotten in a car and then she was never heard of again. And nobody's ever come forward saying, yeah, I picked her up and drove her down to this next town or whatever. So for yes, I feel like for me, there's foul play.
Right. And there's certainly a likelihood that possibly the local police force could have been involved. I mean, there was corruption. The police chief at multiple DUIs. Not that DUIs necessarily mean that you're going to like disappear a girl, but you know.
I find it interesting that a witness didn't even want to call in because the rumors of the police,
Yeah. It doesn't leave you with a good feeling, for sure.
No.
As Fred puts it, there were also a good deal of what he calls, quote, unsavory characters, end quote, living around the area of Maura's disappearance. There were several serial killers in the area and a few reports of a suspicious red truck driving around the day Maura went missing. There was also a rumor about a wild party that Maura may have attended with locals that wound up with her being murdered. One compelling theory is that Maura might have been murdered by a man named Claude Moulton, who lived in an A-frame house about a mile away from the accident scene. In an interesting twist, in 2004, Claude's brother found what he thought was a suspicious-looking rusty knife in Claude's glove box that he thought looked like had blood on it. So, his brother took the knife out of Claude's glove compartment and gave it to Fred, and Fred gave it to the police. While Fred tried to give it to the police refused to take it. So, out of ideas, Fred literally mailed it to the police department and received a receipt label. Nothing else was ever heard about the knife. Then, in 2006, a group of independent investigators searching the area within a few miles of Maura's crash site with cadaver dogs came upon Claude Moulton's A-frame house, and the dogs signaled wildly. Claude was no longer living in the house, and the new owners allowed an in-depth search of the residence and grounds. Inside the home, lumina was used to try to find the existence of blood. In one particular closet, the entire thing phosphoresced. Like, wouldn't that be eerie? Glowing walls, glowing floor, like covered.
Which means that there's the presence of blood. What else? What else could do that?
Well, at this point, they're looking for blood specimens. So,
Right.
yes.
Right.
And Julie says it literally was a thing of like nightmares, seeing this closet just glowing.
Well, because even if you like cut yourself and bleeding, you're not hanging out in your closet.
Isn't that weird?
Right.
I find the fact that it's the closet and the amount is phosphorescent.
Yeah, like up the walls. I've cut myself pretty badly before, and there are places in my house that I'm sure would light up, but not the closet.
So this could definitely signal something not so great happened in there. Now, samples of the carpet in the closet were sent to the police office, where they sit with no updates.
Of course.
Now, private investigators helping the Murrays did remove parts of the closet wall siding in hopes that it might hold some clues, but nothing has developed as of now. The property was searched again using ground-penetrating radar with emphasis around what appeared to be a fairly newly paved like cement pad, but nothing else was found on the site. Fred and Julie believed this was a really strong lead. And at one point, Fred was like, I believe my daughter was here. Like, I believe this is kind of her final resting place, or at least where her life was ended. Now, internet sleuths have shot down this idea. Apparently, there are certain kinds of fertilizer that you can use in grow houses, like marijuana grow houses, that can cause the same amount of luminescence as blood when used with luminol.
Okay, so that's why I asked, what else can light things up like that?
I did not know that until I looked at this.
Uh-huh.
I mean, when I ran my grow house. No.
You mean the one like, right?
Yeah. So maybe that could have explained
But
it.
still, why is it all over a closet? Unless it's over on somebody's clothing or something?
Well, maybe he just used this closet to literally disguise his marijuana grow, and he was spraying the fertilizer and it got on the walls.
Okay. See, that's how much I know about grow houses. You're right. Like maybe
because you're not going to grow it out, and especially at this time,
Right.
like marijuana was not legal.
Oh, you know what?
So if he so he could have hung special grow lights
Yeah,
in the
you're right.
closet and disguised it, and the fertilizer splashed on the walls and floor.
No, I can see that happening. If that's all accurate, like if this fertilizer really does do that, then sure, yeah.
Second, Claude's brother, remember the one that had originally found the knife that had
Mm-hmm.
given it to Fred? He has admitted on at least one occasion that he only turned in a knife to Fred because he was looking for the reward money.
Okay, I was going to ask because I was going to say a brother or brother-in-law to be like, hey, I have suspicions about this person in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what happened to cause that? But maybe they're all just unsavory.
Now, I will say the Murrays still kind of hang their hat on this. They're thinking that there needed to be a better search of the property. And in the end, it could just be all a red herring. I don't know.
I mean, it should be looked into, just like all any of these leads. They should
Yeah.
be looked into.
Yep. In 2022, in another ground search, small bone fragments were found at the base of Loon Mountain, which is just 20 miles from where Maura disappeared. Her family was hopeful that this too would hold some clues, and there was a long-standing rumor that Maura might have been taken to Loon Mountain by some of these notorious killers. Some of these serial killers kind of hung out in that mountainous area. Or maybe Maura made it there on her own. Remember, she had an affinity for hiking and camping, and that was a favorite pastime of her family. Maybe if she was in some emotional turmoil, maybe she wanted to go there. Unfortunately, though, those bone fragments have come back as unrelated to Maura. Maura's case is also part of an FBI investigation, and information about her disappearance can be freely exchanged among law enforcement offices. Now, that's actually a recent development, but it's there now. And the hope is that, little pieces can add up to big pieces. But to date, the FBI has never been asked to actually assist in Maura's search, even though they could be. Her case absolutely qualifies because she passed over state lines, but they have to be asked to join by New Hampshire, who has never done so.
But I've been thinking it the whole time, kind of like where you hear about those departments who don't want help because they want to be, this is my investigation, this is my jurisdiction, this is my case. And they lose sight that, like, it doesn't really matter whose case it is, whose jurisdiction. Like, let's just call in the best people for the job.
Right.
And I've kind of gotten that vibe as you've talked that maybe they just didn't want to admit they weren't the best people for the job. Now, at the same time, I can see why, if they truly don't believe that this is anything more than just, somebody walked off into the snow, why you wouldn't want to waste the FBI's time if you truly feel like there's no evidence that anything else could have happened. But I think there's enough here to leave even the most, like, conservative thinking person. There's enough here to look further.
Well, here's the deal. If you really just think she wandered off into the snow and she's come to the elements, why are you holding on to all of her files?
Exactly. You
Like,
can't
that
have
doesn't
it
make
both
any
ways.
sense. You can't have it both ways. That's how I
Right.
feel. Well, if that's the case, turn it over. Let her
Mhm.
family figure it out then.
Unless, once again, they don't want anybody figuring it out. I kind of hate to, I hate to go like,
I
the cops
know.
did it, but, like, there's a lot of
But it's
weirdness.
weird. Like, why? And again, maybe they're just bad at their jobs.
Right.
But it's disturbingly bad.
Oh, sure. I mean, we can't even get times right.
That's right. Now, like I said, most of the Murray family believes that Maura met with foul play, which means she's most likely deceased. And I mean, this is pretty hard for everyone to swallow. But Julie also points to the re-victimization her family has felt from the way her sister's case has been covered on social media and overall in the true crime universe. Remember, Maura's case was special, right? It was touted as the first crime mystery of the social media age. According to Julie, true crime content creators have often divulged salacious and often untrue information about her sister's case, clouding the opportunities to actually locate her sister. She cites poor fact checking, a misplaced focus on ratings, and the loss of perspective as a few reasons her family was treated as less than the grieving family they were. As a result, Julie Murray launched the Engage with Empathy campaign with the goal of uniting survivors of true crime, supporters, and content creators. She's awesome.
She's so awesome.
Goals of the program include offering support and solace to those struggling with loss and trauma, educating content creators on the lasting effects their content has on those who have the most at stake in the stories they cover, and educating the public on how to identify responsible and ethical true crime content. And lastly, engaging the true crime community on issues important to victims and families left behind in the wake of these tragedies. A quote from Julie reads, "Engage with empathy means putting yourself in our position for just a minute. How would you like to be treated?" Getting teary because it's so powerful. How would you like your missing loved one to be treated? It doesn't mean censorship. It means balancing the value with the potential harm caused by exploiting private citizens with the worst day of their lives.
Ooh.
Sorry, I'm going to take a minute. We are all struggling with some real difficult stuff. Treating people with empathy can make a world of difference.
Wow, Julie. I mean,
I'm just like, boom.
and I have to say, not to pat our own backs, but Stephanie and I had this conversation early on in our podcast lifetime where we said we want to bring the most factual stuff we can. We're human. We're going to make mistakes. We're not perfect, but this is why it's so important. And unfortunately, we've talked about how we've seen other, sometimes really popular shows even misreporting facts and how upsetting that can be and frustrating because it muddies the water. So, whoo, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Julie, that's powerful.
Powerful. Yeah. Her challenge to content creators and the true crime community is to operate through what she calls the CARE acronym, CARE. C, center the victim. A, avoid harmful speculation. R, research responsibly, which means being critical and curious of content. Make sure you verify things. And E is engage with empathy that we've discussed. And as you've said, I don't want to toot our own horn, but I do feel like we have tried to do this in our almost year of podcasting, that we really do put ourselves in these shoes. I know every mother and father we talk about, you and I tear up because that's true. That's really our hearts. And again, we're human. We're going to mess up. We're going to report something wrong, but we're genuinely trying to do it the right way. And I guess this is me kind of putting a challenge to our listeners. Make sure that the creators you're listening to are creating responsible content, that they're not just creating it to be exploitive or salacious, but they're actually trying to do good with their program. And that, in a not so small nutshell, is the story of Maura Murray. And again, I highly recommend that you check out Media Pressure, which is hosted by Julie Murray herself. Even Julie admits in the podcast that she is a relatively private person, and the idea of sharing such a personal part of her life is difficult, but it is necessary and in a small way healing to her family. So I urge you to hop over to Media Pressure, where you can hear Maura's story from those who knew her best. That kind of leads us back to our own campaign, the Branch of Hope Foundation. I mean, I know you have some final thoughts on Maura too. I mean, how do you even wrap your head around this?
I don't. This one's going to be running around in my brain for a while because every time I think, okay, maybe this, but then there was this was this might be one of the twistiest things we've talked about here.
It's wild.
And to think that maybe, again, so much of it isn't even related. But then to think, again, to put ourselves back in the shoes when I think her family, they're literally anything, any detail that might help somebody help point us in the right direction. That kind of desperation, I can only imagine just how helpless they must feel.
It's hard.
It's rough. This is a really sad case. Whoa, it's rough.
It's hard.
Rough. Yeah.
And I do think having the family's perspective on it, you feel that.
Mm-hmm.
You feel it. This isn't something that we're just regurgitating, from a news article or another podcast. I am not in any way making myself more important than I am, but I do hope in some way I'm helping the Murrays.
No, I think anybody who shares her story responsibly, somebody knows something.
Right?
Somebody knows something.
And who knows how they're going to hear about it.
Right. Well, I'm definitely going to check out Media Pressure.
Please do.
Absolutely going to check that out. I definitely encourage our listeners to check them out too. You did an amazing job. And I feel like I have an affinity now with Maura and the Murray family. That,
Yeah.
even though I have heard her name many, many times, this is a highly reported case, but you were able to bring information on a level that I have not heard before. So thank you for sharing that.
All the thanks really goes to Julie. I appreciate her sharing, as she said, the worst day of her life.
Right.
I mean,
that breaks my heart.
I
That
know.
breaks my heart. Ooh, okay. All right. Let's move to the Branch of Hope report.
Yeah, the small kindness we try to do for the cases that we cover and for our listeners alike.
That's right. So as we mentioned, every month through our charity called the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of our earnings from our Patreon and our sponsors to a nonprofit organization related to the first episode of the month. 2 weeks ago, we talked about Paulette Hebera Fara, a 4-year-old who was born incredibly premature and had some health issues because of that. So we wanted to highlight the Gift of Life 27, who helps support families here in Central Florida who are affected by premature birth. And they've helped thousands of families and so many babies, and they bring so much hope and encouragement at a time when families really, really need it. So we encourage you to hop on over to the giftoflife27.org. Or you can find out more information at our website, thedarkoak.com.
Please check out our Patreon if you are so inclined. A portion of your subscription will go directly to our Branch of Hope Foundation organization of the month. And also, you get some freebies. You get some extra content. You get a little live with Cynthia and I. And you also get to chat with us. Tell us what cases are piquing your interest and what you might like to hear next.
And we've brought some really compelling cases on our Patreon. Maybe in the next couple of weeks, we'll list off some of those cases that
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, that we covered, because some of them are highly requested.
They're goodies.
So we put those in our Patreon. So there's good content there too. Be sure to follow us to our next episode, where we discuss the very mysterious death of Jessica Renee Johnson. I actually have been speaking with her mother, so I have some firsthand information on her case. It's a very, very strange set of circumstances, so you don't want to miss that.
Ooh, another highly covered case. Can't wait to hear what you find out.
It is, but the fact that I was able to talk to her mom made me feel really good, because I got, again, that firsthand information.
Yeah.
So.
Love that.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for listening, Shiver Seekers.
Bye.
Bye. This episode of The Dark Oak was created, researched, written, recorded, hosted, edited, published, and marketed by Cynthia and Stephanie of Just Us Gals Productions, and made possible by you, our shiver-seeking listener. Special thanks goes to Justice Himes for our incredible artwork and Ryan Creep for our amazing music.